Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, where we simplify the complexities of your leadership journey. I'm your host, Mo, and today we have a truly dynamic guest joining us, Tullio Siragusa. Tullio is a strategic operating partner with over 36 years of experience, driving growth and leading transformational change. He's the creator of the EmpathIQ Framework, which integrates design thinking, force field analysis, OKRs, and neuroscience-based coaching to help leaders, teams align with their shared purpose. His work helps organizations cultivate empathy and accountability, translating ambitious goals into measurable outcomes. If you've ever wondered how empathy and neuroscience can transform your organizational performance, today's the day. Tullio, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Before we get started, why don't you tell my audience a little bit about you, where you came from, how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. The simplest way I can describe what I do is I give CEOs their life back. And we'll go into a little bit about that in just a second. I've been an operating executive for 36 years, predominantly in technology. I held senior sales, marketing, operational leadership roles, including multiple CXOs roles. And my last operating role, I had the fortune of being part of what became a unicorn that had tremendous growth. We had a $1.5 billion private equity exit. And it was a company that had a lot of self-management principles built into it. So it was a great way to show that you can scale a business successfully without command and controls, with very empathetic way of being. And we infused a lot of design thinking principles in how we went to market and how that resonated with our customers, especially as a B2B company that often don't look at those things. They think their business is more transactional, and we've proven otherwise. And so in the past 3 years, I really branched out on my own to be more of a fractional executive and a strategic advisor. And I've been helping smaller companies punch above their weight by putting in place the thinking and the frameworks to allow them to operate with more agility, where we have more decentralized, autonomous decision-making, more empowerment, and ultimately removing that codependency with the owner or the CEO that often becomes a bit of a bottleneck, but makes it impossible for those CEOs to actually enjoy their work. I got to tell you, there's so many owners and CEOs will say, I have to do things I don't want to do because everybody's counting on me, and they're actually disengaged themselves. And I'm like, if you're not excited to be here, could you imagine how your employees feel? So often what I do is gives them a sense of feeling like they now get to do what they love doing again, and everyone else in the organization feels the same. So it's a win-win for everyone. And I enjoy it. It's tremendously fulfilling to give people that sense of empowerment and the ability to grow and to step into leadership, and ultimately teaching leaders how to create more leaders.
Tullio, you've spent decades leading transformational change across a ton of sectors. Take us back a bit. I mean, what experiences maybe in your early career shaped your leadership philosophy today?
I had the good fortune to have been in markets that have different vibes, so to speak. So my first career experience was in New York City in the telecom and IT industry. And New York City has the reputation of being a very speedy and commercially minded marketplace. So I happened to have worked with the number 2 sales and marketing organization in the world at the time. Xerox was number 1, MCI was number 2, and I worked in global accounts. And I learned very quickly the whole point of speedy commercialization. We'd sell stuff we didn't even have and get clients signed up and then go build it. That's the kind of culture that it was. And that company grew from like $1 billion when I joined to $20 billion, predominantly organically, in 9 years, and just a phenomenal experience. So I grasped on very early on what it means to have a commercial mindset and to be able to take a position in the marketplace and then work backwards and rally everyone around it. And there were a lot of things that came out of there too. I was fortunate to work with Vince Cerf and introducing the commercial internet to the world. So, at the time, you don't know what was going on until you look back afterwards. You're like, wow, we were literally changing the way things get done, the way business get done, the way people live. And so I was there at the very beginning of it and had a lot of fun with it. So that shaped a lot of my thinking in terms of what it's like to disrupt This was a company that broke down the telecom monopoly. So that mindset was introduced, how to introduce something that's never been done before and create a market for it. So great skills about, being commercially minded. And then I went on to an IT services company that was operating out of Mexico at the time when the offshore space was beginning to take flight. Most of the companies that are multi-billion dollar companies today were just smaller companies at the time, but they had cornered these offshore offerings. And this company out of Mexico named Softec was like, okay, we're not offshore. How do we differentiate ourselves? And I remember sitting around trying to find a way to create a category for ourselves. And we came up and landed on the term nearshore services. And that stuck. That has become 27 years later the default way of describing working with Latin America, nearshore. So again, category creation, opportunity to define a market, shape a market. And I'll never forget, I went to the CEO at the time about how do we do this? How do we do that? It was their first VP of sales and marketing. And the comment I got was, we gave you a blank book, write the pages of our history. And that was that moment where I realized you have to be willing to be accountable and make a decision, stick your neck out, put a fork in the ground or a flag in the ground and be willing to stand by what you want to do. And I learned to do that in a very collaborative way because I had come from that environment. So that was an opportunity to also realize sometimes you have to be the one who writes the story. And so that was very entrepreneurial. So I learned a lot of lessons from that. And I was exposed to the force field analysis then because we had McKinsey as a client, McKinsey and Company as a client. It was actually one of our most profitable clients and learned a lot working with McKinsey and Company for 3 years, especially this force field analysis that I adopted back then. So 27 years ago, I've been doing it for almost 3 decades. It's a great tool to really do like a company-wide self-awareness exercise on what has gotten you to where you are today and what's holding you back from where you want to go. And it's a very telltale, very quick way to get down to brass tacks about what's working and what's not working. And I've done many, many force field analysis over the years for reorganization, post M&A integration, even for account management planning or go-to-market strategy. And it's very effective. Obviously, over 3 decades, I've mastered using it in ways that allows me to quickly get to what I need to work on, especially when you get brought in as an advisor or as a fractional executive. You want to create value right away. So one of the first things I do is multiple force field analysis with clients to dig into what we need to work on. And then from there, obviously come up with plans. And I learned OKRs is a great way to move things forward. But I modified those OKRs because OKRs can be very micromanagement type, very micromanagement driven, but I adopted them to be more collaborative instead of owners or champions. So I also, as fast forward a little bit, was exposed to the guys who created big data and cloud computing at Axiom. We didn't even have a name for it. We called it grid computing, parallel processing. And Netiza was just a small company we had given some seed money to that we could put into our boxes in Conway. And it was literally changing the way data and infrastructure took place. And so again, was an opportunity to create a market that didn't exist and introduce something new. So all these things shaped my way of thinking about category creation, value creation, how to differentiate yourself in the marketplace with a commercial mindset. But really what brought it all home for me is 7 years ago, I joined a self-management company in the software engineering space, a company called Nearsoft, which eventually got acquired and that company got acquired. But this was a place where I really got to practice a lot of the things that I believed in, which is you don't need bosses to build a business and you don't need to centralize decision-making. You can create autonomy. You can share authority. You can create an environment where people feel empowered and you can localize decision-making where it matters the most, where the work is being done. So that they're more closely tied to those decisions. They can best make those decisions because they're closer to the work being done. So you can structure things in such a way, instead of kingdoms and silos, you have teams that collaborate. You take the approach to running a business more like pods. And instead of titles giving you authority, it's really who's willing to serve others that get followed. So hierarchy happens through merit, not through title. And just a great sort of change of thinking and really a departure from the traditional command and control structure that I was used to for many years. And since then, I've come to realize that most companies, the reason they operate that way, it's the leftover of the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, you had to have rigid approaches to things because it safeguard lives. I mean, if you didn't have a strict process for manufacturing, you could literally die if you didn't follow a process that was well defined. So it served its purpose. It was necessary. But a lot of companies still operate in that military command and control model, treating people like cogs. Well, we're not building stuff. We're not manufacturing. We're not machines, yet we're applying the same operating principles to many companies today. And so once I got exposed to the self-management way of doing things, I realized, wow, that's so not effective. We're using a model that was not meant for the knowledge space or the gig economy. And that no wonder people are so disengaged. In fact, Gallup recently did a study that shows only 31% of employees are engaged in the US, 21% globally. It's even worse globally. That's the same as saying, I'm going to pay you a full year's salary. You're going to work 3 months out of the year, and the next 9 months, you can just all go home. That's exactly what's happening. And yet CEOs are being commended for their performance by their boards or by Wall Street, because everything that they're predicting or forecasting is based on only 31% of the organization being productive, which is the same thing as only working 3 months out of the year, but paying for a full year's salary. And so people are like, why is there such an disengagement? Because you can't apply industrial thinking into the knowledge age. You can't treat people like cogs in a machine. People need some dignity, some empathy. They have needs, human needs. And if you're not meeting those needs, people show up to work because they have to, not because they want to. We still, of course, have to make a living, but it's the difference of wanting to make a living in a way that's joyful because you actually enjoy what you do, because you get to make an impact. You get to grow. You belong to something greater than yourself. You have meaning behind what you're doing because you're collaborating. You're not under someone's thumb who's micromanaging you. In the environments that exist today, people are disengaged. The data shows it. Now, conversely, the Deloitte, McKinsey, and the Gallups have been researching companies that operate with empathetic models, with more conscious capitalist type of way of doing things, with more autonomy. And those companies, their numbers speak for themselves. Significantly more profitable, significantly higher growth in revenue, 3x engagement. So they're typically seeing 76, 80% productivity and engagement, which means those companies are operating at 3x the capacity of the other ones. So they can outcompete everyone. So the numbers are there, but the mindset hasn't caught up, right? So I'm on a mission to educate as many leaders and boards and even Wall Street about the fact that empathetic leadership is not a nice to have. It's actually strategic, and the data shows it. If those who are completely driven by data, look at the data. The data reflects this reality that empathetic leadership, purpose-driven leadership, companies that operate with more autonomy, companies that operate with more agile, decentralized decision-making, they outperform all the other ones. So it is strategically imperative to be competitive. And by the way, companies who operate this way also have a higher adoption rate of AI, because AI thrives in decentralized environments. Whereas the studies are coming in and showing that 70 to 95% of AI adoption by major corporations are failing or being abandoned because it's revealing a dysfunction in their operating model. It's not the technology that doesn't work. It's the operating model. It's the management structure that doesn't work. You can't have 3 levels of rubber stamp of approvals. If you want to use AI for speed, it doesn't work. It's like putting a Ferrari on a dirt road. As soon as you go fast, it's not going to grip. It's going to fly off the road, right? You got to put the asphalt in place, right?
Yeah.
So the bottom line is, not only is it strategic in terms of the outcome without AI, but when you introduce AI in that environment, it succeeds, but also exponentially supports those people to be more successful. I'm on this mission of educating as many people as possible at this model. In fact, 7 years ago, I co-founded radicalpurpose.org with this exact mission to help companies realize you can be good to people. You can be empathetic to their needs. You can create community that's purposeful. And that community includes your customers, your employees, your investors, your partners, and you can take an approach that humanizes what you do, and you'll be a lot more effective at it financially. You get the best of both worlds. I mean, that's the beauty of conscious capitalism, right? Good for profits, good for people, good for planet. So, that the EmpathIQ framework is designed to help a company go from command and control, hierarchical, centralized decision-making into one that's decentralized, agile, autonomous, and a lot more effective, where innovation is the norm, not the sort of exception to the rule.
Yeah, you've mentioned before that empathy is measurable and trainable, and I'd love to hear about that. How can leaders actually measure empathy and embed it in their leadership culture?
Well, if you look at what's happening, I mean, it doesn't, even without looking at the data, empathy is really about understanding that people have different needs. And one of the things we did at radicalpurpose.org is we dug into what creates highly engaged cultures. Why are some cultures more engaged than others? And we spent almost 2.5 years digging into this. We had a bunch of self-management practitioners that were part of this research, as well as a lot of organizational psychologists. And we landed on 4 key tenets. And those tenets happen to be actually what matters to every single one of us. And it's cross-generational. It's not like this only applies to Gen Zs or Gen Y. It applies to all of us. All human beings have these needs. Number one is the need to belong to something greater than yourself. This is why religion and politics is so big. Number two is to have meaning behind our lives. And this is why those same systems are so big, and also why people build houses, have families, become entrepreneurs, trying to give meaning to what they're doing, join movements. And then number 3 is to the ability to make an impact. Same reason why people are motivated to build companies, have a family, join movements, become activists. They want to make an impact. And finally, the desire to become more. This is why the self-help industry is, I don't know, like $1 trillion. It's huge, right? Because everyone wants to grow. Once these things are met, what happens is it activates a sense of fulfillment where your life, if it has meaning and you belong to something greater and you get to make an impact and you get to grow, you feel fulfilled. We're not talking about happiness here, because happiness can be fleeting, but fulfillment is the key, because that's that feeling where you are not just satisfied with what's going on in your life, but feel like you're accomplishing something that's giving purpose to your life. And so when you synergize that inside of an organization, people are more engaged. I've seen it. I've seen organizations X their capacity without any additional headcount. So if you're a 40-employee company, now you are operating as if you're 120 employees. And people step up naturally to want to contribute because they naturally want to make an impact, naturally want to give more meaning to what they're doing. So in a practical example, imagine being a software developer and the company has initiated a quarterly goal to do a refinement of the go-to-market strategy. That came out of an analysis. Perhaps there was a force field analysis that says we're not landing as good as we could be because we have to fine tune our GTM strategy. It's just not landing very well. We're another transaction amongst many transactions, but we want to infuse more empathy so that it resonates with our customers. So we need to refine it. And so the company says, who wants to participate in refining the company's GTM? It's open to anyone in the organization that wants to be part of a team that will go and redefine this. And here are the parameters. You can be a champion for this goal. You can be a supporter, or you can be an observer. An observer can just watch. They get invited to the weekly calls. They get to participate and just learn because they have never done it before. So here's a software developer, sees this objective and says, I'm curious about that. I'm going to sign up for that team as an observer. Now, the team's having a meeting talking about brainstorming, what can we do? We should go do some research. We should go talk to some customers to see what resonated with them. We should try to replicate what's worked and codify it. The developer hears the words codify it. I'm good at codifying stuff. That's what I do, right? So throughout these meetings, a question might come up about how do we make this in such a way that's scalable, that we can codify this into a repeatable process. Well, now here's a developer who maybe is familiar with Agile or other methodologies that could offer some valuable input. When we build software, this is kind of how we go about it, and we document things, and then we create a framework on how we could build this stuff, and there's open source technologies that gives us access to different components. Now they're educating about how to think bigger about codifying this approach. Now they just contribute. They didn't just learn, they contributed. They made an impact. And sometimes the greatest wisdom comes out of the least places you expect. So once you begin to see that kind of collaborative engagement, it doesn't take rocket science to figure out the impact that has in bubbling up innovation, in the company collaborating and solving a problem together. And then once it's solved, there's no process to go communicate it and go sell it to everybody, because the company participated and owned it and owns it moving forward. So you get the benefit of the team creating it. It wasn't top down. So there's no rebellion up front to say, I didn't have anything to do with that, right? It's a human condition to quickly push back, right? So none of that exists because the team defined it. Then the team positions it to the rest of the company as a company-wide effort. It's already bought in. So it doesn't take a lot of tracking to figure out the speed on how things move and the innovation that comes out of that. There are stats that show that companies that operate this way have seen over a period of 15 years where 1,000% ROI in their growth in the market. And how companies operating this way usually outcompete the S&P 500 by 7x in profitability. So there are stats that show that this model produces real tangible results. But even just common sense, the more people collaborate, the faster things move, the more ownership, the less likelihood of having to sell something, faster adoption translates into better outcomes in the marketplace. And then when you position yourself where you include your customers as part of that community mindset, because you're talking with them, you're involving them, you're having conversations with them, you're being curious to let them give you input because maybe you don't have all the answers. Maybe your 40 years of experience in that marketplace is good, but actually listening to customers and empathizing with their needs is better. So that team now takes a look at how they solve problems, not just together, but involve customers, past and present. So that collaboration creates speed, creates innovation, and you just can't compete with a company like that. So it's not hard to measure. It takes about 2 to 3 quarters as you transform into this direction to see how much more the company can do, how many more goals the company can take on, and how engaged the employees become. It's experiential. You have to go through it to see it, but the data's there. The stats are there. It doesn't take hard to find it.
Yeah, so we want to be empathetic with those that we supervise. What's the connection between empathy and accountability? Because you need to have both, right? So are they complementary? Do they work with one another?
Absolutely. In fact, you can't have one without the other. Being empathetic requires 100% self-accountability. So in these models, the reason they work, and people are like, oh, self-management, that's chaos. Who's in charge? How do you hold people accountable? Well, if you just say, hey, I just do your stuff, yeah, that would be total chaos. But there are 2 rules on how this works. So there's actual more structure, but the structure is not being driven top down. It's more like an agreement. We agree that we're going to operate as adults, be treated as adults, and act as adults. Number 1, no one can force you to do what you don't want to do. They can't coerce you. They can't use fear tactics. So there's no force in this model. But number 2, it requires 100% self-accountability. You have to produce value for your team and for the company. That is inherent in the freedom you get to choose where you want to focus your attention, but also you have to be accountable to the company. So you can't be like, I didn't hear about that announcement. It's your job to keep up with the announcements. You have a responsibility to keep up. Waiting for someone to tell you what to do, that's defaulting to, I don't have to take any accountability. As long as the boss is making a decision, if it goes bad or right, it's not my fault. No, that's the way children are. So if you want to be treated an adult with a lot of autonomy and authority and decentralized decision-making, well, then you have to show up as an adult. Now, when you give people those 4 things, right, that we talked about, the ability to make an impact, belong to something greater than themselves, to collaborate, you break down the silos, it's amazing how naturally people step into it. I have never seen a scenario where people just sit back and like, oh, I can do whatever I want now. No, it doesn't work that way. In traditional company, an employee can hide out for months. They got a boss over here and maybe they got a few layers of middle management and someone's over there hiding for months because you don't have time to get to everybody, right? It happens all the time. In this model, you can't hide out for more than a few days because your team will call you out. What are you doing?
Right.
Where are you? We work as a pod, We're 100% accountable to each other, and we actually create collaborative agreements. So each pod has agreements amongst themselves on a timeline when a request is put out on how long you have to respond. They create those agreements amongst themselves. It's not management or leadership. There's no bosses involved. You have to have a model that says, hey, we're going to be adults. We're going to have a lot of autonomy, and we're going to be responsible to each other. And what does that look like? Let's agree to a few basic things, like when a request is put out, how much time do we have to respond? So if someone's hiding out for 2-3 days, the team's going to be like, where are you? So this model's introducing really friendship into work. Companies like, oh, we're a family. Well, some families are dysfunctional. If you're a family that acts as friends, that's great, right? Because in a family, there's always someone in charge, a patriarch or a matriarch, right? That model is still a command and control model. Friendship is different, or team, like a sports team. You have people who play the role of leading, but it's because they're willing to serve. You automatically follow someone who's willing to serve you. It's merited. It's not by title. And then what do friends do? They celebrate each other's wins. They don't compete with each other. They're not trying to impress the boss, which creates competition. I got to do better so I can impress the boss. I got to go stroke the boss's ego and put that person down so I make myself look better. I mean, this is the nonsense that happens in most companies, right? The politics, there's no need for politics. There's no one to impress. You have complete autonomy. You work as a team. So you become friends. Let's celebrate each other. And friends support each other when one is down. What's going on? Oh, I just lost a good friend. Okay, you know what? Who can take on his or her workload for the next couple of weeks? We can give them a little time to mourn, right? As a team, that's what they do. They support each other. And a really good friend will call you out when you're going off track. A good friend will not sell you out and just watch you fall off track and say nothing. So the same way, the team will say, hey, you're going off track here. What's going on? Let's reel you in. So I always say in a self-management company, not one person can fire you. No one person has that authority, including the CEO. But anyone in the organization can call a case to discuss a course correction that could end up in either you being course corrected or the team inviting you to leave. And as a team, they have that authority and that power to do that because you've decided to no longer be accountable to the team. That's a decision you made. So the team could also decide they don't want you in the team. So it's very different, the dynamics. It takes the pressure off of one person having to make every decision, and it localizes where the impact is made. Even when you hire people, a team can decide who they need better than a leader. They know what the gaps are within the team. They know how to hire someone that can fill those gaps and create more synergy in the team. Most leaders in traditional companies will just keep hiring clones of each other. Right? So, and then you still end up with gaps because maybe someone on a client management pod is really good at account management. Maybe someone is really good on the delivery side, and maybe someone's really good at sales. So that team has an agreement that says, we have to grow our portfolio. Who's going to go and talk to clients about growing our portfolio? And two team members like, we're really comfortable at doing it. We'll take that on for the team. So now those two people who excel at that will do that for the team. And then someone is like, I actually like doing the nitty gritty stuff behind the scenes. Great. You take on the nitty gritty stuff. So now it's like, yeah, our workload is growing. We need to hire more people. And they had their budget and their P&L shows that they can do that. And so they make a decision to go hire someone. And as a team, there's like, where is our biggest gap? You know, where our biggest gap is? We need someone who's more strategic, who can plan things better. We're really good at executing, but we're not really good at like being strategic and planning ahead of time. So let's make sure the person that we hire next can also do the execution, but is also a really good strategic systems thinker that can bring that quality that's missing in our team. And they look for that and they hire for that, right? Because they know value will come out of that. So it's different even how you hire people because you focus on synergizing what the team is really effective at doing. And it's pod based. So you move away from titles and you move into more functional capacity. There's a function we need to fulfill. We have an accounting function. We have a sales function. We have an account management function. These are functions that need to be fulfilled. How they get fulfilled doesn't have to be in silos. You can organize all those activities around client management. Within our client management pods, we need to have good account management. We need to have some sales, so upsell. We need to have some good marketing. We need to have good delivery. That becomes our pod that manages client relationship. We have multiple pods and they're set up like mini P&Ls and they manage their own P&L. like a franchise. And then it's like, well, we need a leadership pod, but we don't want to call it a leadership pod. Let's call it a guidance pod. So there's a few people that are part of the guidance pod. That's the pod that looks at where are our gaps in the business, where are our opportunities, where are our blind spots, who proactively looks at what the CEO would do, right? Or the COO would do. Usually that pod might be the CEO, and some other key leaders. But they begin to change their approach in terms of how do we serve the company? How do we serve the people of the company? How does that align with our purpose as a business? So it's a different approach that's more effective because there's more collaboration, and there's also the collective wisdom that comes out of that. And it takes the pressure of one person making every decision. It's too much pressure. It's exhausting. Most CEOs are dying too young. It's too much. No one was made to make all those decisions. We're also social creatures by nature.
Right.
We thrive in collaborative environments, no matter what level you are in the organization. You need that. And often what happens to most CEOs, they get to the top and they realize it's very lonely over here and depressing because you're always looking over your shoulder to see the next person who's trying to kick you off your chair. That's just the reality of it. And so you often have to be very duplicitous. You put on a mask, which is your office mask, and then you get to go home and be nice and kind and empathetic. And sometimes you go home and forget to take the mask, and your poor family gets the brunt of the leader who has to be tough at work because everybody's trying to kick them off their seat. I mean, that's the reality of what happens in these companies versus an environment where no one's trying to impress you. No one's trying to get that job. Everybody's just working collaboratively. And in some companies, they actually vote yearly for their CEOs, and some companies have co-CEOs. Could you imagine that anyone can run for that position in the company? I mean, talk about a democratic way of running a business, right? Because you still need CEOs, you still need certain leaders to perform certain functions, but it's not about the flex of the power of the title. It's about what can I do to serve the business with this role? So shifting to that, it's not for everybody. And there's different versions of that. There's the enlightened monarch version where you still have very strong leadership, but more empowerment, right? But there's still a lot of critical decision making that gets made at the top. There's that model, and that has its benefit. Then there's the model which is completely decentralized. The leaders really serve and coach the team, and they create a sense of equivalence in the business. So everyone's got the data they need, the intelligence they need to make good decisions. Everything is made consensus with that kind of decision model, and that has its benefit. And then you have companies that are traditional command and control, but there's a department where they're looking to build more innovation, and they make that department operate as a self-managed unit. But they're still part of a traditional hierarchy. It's not one size fits all. It really depends on the readiness of the leadership, the readiness of the organization, the consciousness of the CEO, for example, the consciousness of the board. If the board is all about shareholder value, but everything about shareholder value is the traditional metrics, it's going to be hard to say, well, part of creating shareholder value is improving our productivity instead of 30% productivity, which means we're only getting 3 months out of our employees, but we're paying them for 12. If it means expanding on that, if the consciousness is to be open on how to expand that by introducing more empathy, and the vehicle to create more shareholder value from that context is actually to create more employee satisfaction. So maybe that board should have a employee satisfaction committee because that will have a direct impact on productivity, which ultimately contributes to shareholder value in terms of revenues. But not many boards or CEOs still operate this way. They don't think this way. So it really depends on the consciousness of each organization. The more evolved the consciousness is about being of service and realizing that the job of a leader is to create other leaders, the more likely that they are to adopt these principles and models and benefit from them. So it really depends on the consciousness.
Tullio, you've been developing leaders for well over 3 decades. If you could leave our listeners with one challenge to apply to their lives this week, what would it be?
Learn to be powerfully vulnerable. When you're vulnerable, you create psychological safety. You create an environment where people can be human. How does that look like in a practical way? Well, look for those opportunities where maybe you didn't make the right decision or it didn't go as well as you thought it would. And instead of hiding in and trying to look like you're perfect all the time, go to your team and say, I messed up, guys, and I need your help to fix it. How do we fix this? Open it up. Now, it's scary to do that because that kind of vulnerability has historically been linked to you're weak How will you be perceived if you don't have the answers? Shouldn't you have the answers? You're the person with all the answers, right? But what happens is when you do that, people naturally want to be helpful because they naturally want to make an impact. So you open the door for people to make an impact. And they love to be the person who impresses the boss, right? So they'll do it from that motivation. But what begins to happen is you're creating a culture where you openly can discuss learning opportunities. So being powerfully vulnerable is about activating the biggest thing that could benefit your business, to move away from success or failure and to institute learning as a business together and growing. And I often say, look at the way science works. Discoveries are made through hundreds of permutations that initially fail. All that those permutations did is they proved successfully what model or formula doesn't work. But you get to the 100th permutation, so 99% fail, you get to the 100th, that succeeds. Now, you have successfully created an outcome through learning, a failure. All those permutations are just lessons. This doesn't work, that doesn't work. When you create psychological safety in the organization, when you're powerfully vulnerable, you create a model where people can step in and learn from those things that we would have otherwise called a failure. And the more the organization learns, the more willing it is to innovate and try new things, because there's safety in trying something that may not succeed, but will produce an outcome where we can learn and get closer to succeeding. Of course, you don't want to just take risk for the sake of risk. This is about introducing calculated risk taking, and the place where someone can say, I tried something that didn't work out. I need some help to fix it, because you as the leader have modeled it. Now you create an environment for intimacy. Intimacy is that friendship model. Turn your employees into friends. Create a friendship model. Operate like a sports team. You're there to win together. Mistakes aren't failures. They're just learning opportunities. They're lessons that you can pivot from and you can grow from. And if you create an environment where people feel safe to take on calculated risk, you're going to move with such a momentum that other people can't compete with you. And so it's institutionalizing safety is key. As a leader, that's the one thing I would recommend. Learn how to be vulnerable, very powerfully vulnerable, because it creates psychological safety. And that requires a certain sense of self-worth. People with the highest sense of self-worth are not afraid to be vulnerable. People with the lowest sense of self-worth are afraid to be vulnerable because they tie their self-worth based on who approves of them, who thinks highly of them, who agrees with them. So to show some kind of vulnerability would be a weakness for them, would be a risk to their own self-worth. So if you are checking in with yourself saying, there's no way I can do that, you might actually be suffering from lower self-worth than you think, because you're externally driven by what people think of you, instead of realizing that you're growing and learning. We are growing and learning every day. No one's arrived. We are constantly growing and learning. So set the example as the number one leader who is open to learning and growing, is vulnerable enough to get input, to get collaboration, and create a model where people feel safe and create intimacy with your team. Once you experience that, you'll never go back to the way you used to do things because it feels dirty. It's like, I can never go back to that. It's the idea of those kinds of way of doing things. It makes me gag. It's like, why would I do that? It's so ineffective to do it that way. So that's it. That's the one thing I would encourage you to focus on.
Tullio, where can my audience connect with you?
They can visit TullioSiragusa.com. That's TullioSiragusa.com. My email's there, all my social handles, LinkedIn, everything is right there. And I have over 350 blogs about what I just spoke about, plenty of content on pretty much any topic you can look up, from design thinking principles to EQ leadership. Being vulnerable is actually a number of blogs about that. So yeah, that's the way to reach me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on today and talking about this. It's a huge thing that leaders really need to understand and bring their team alongside of them. So thank you for that. For my audience, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with somebody who needs to hear it. Sign up for our monthly newsletter. It's free to give you all the good stuff. Until next time, Tullio, thanks for making the time, and I hope to have you on again.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yes, sir.